John, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Now, yesterday I was speaking to another trade unionist who made a very interesting comment. He said, we've lost its soul, but somehow regained it in around 2008, 2009. What's your take on that?
Well, there are many WEFs and many discussions going on here, so we're trying to win the battle of the soul, not just the WEF, but really the business community, the NGOs, and also the governments which are here. I think the core issue now, which is beginning to find its way onto the agenda, is the real risk of rising inequality globally. And so I think that's the core, and we have to move now from perhaps seeing that as an issue, maybe seeing it as a moral problem or a social problem, but also now understanding it has major economic effects. Unless we can get more inclusive growth, then basically the global economy is not going to work either.
Bringing you to South Africa, where the wage gap is a very, very hot debate. How do we move from talking about this and creating awareness to actually practical trickle-down effects into how companies do business and how they value their workers in the same equation?
Well, I think it needs a comprehensive strategy, and I think there have been some success stories. If you take Brazil and South Africa as two very different but nevertheless emerging economies, Brazil had the highest level of inequality in the world 20 years ago. It managed to reduce the Gini coefficient, the measure of inequality, by 6 points, that's 10% in 10 years, by a combination of policy. Now, for different reasons, and it's not all the fault of policy, South Africans' Gini has risen. So I think there are models. I mean, I'd put 5 issues as key. Firstly, I think we have to look at, obviously, the education system is important, but beyond the education system, then how you begin to create quality jobs in the real economy. Now, in Brazil, they also looked at how to raise the minimum wage by quite substantially. So you begin to bring people from the informal economy into the formal economy, because jobs are worth actually getting. But then on top of that, good social policies, a good social safety net. The Bolsa Familiar worked in Brazil. And beyond that, companies themselves, actually getting companies focusing on investment, but changing the structure of the economy, which is important in South Africa as well, to broaden out industrial growth.
Another key issue in South Africa, and I guess the broader continent, is the mechanization that we're seeing, especially in a core industry like the mining sector, and we're persistently seeing the shedding of jobs as that process unfolds. How do we ensure that a skills revolution also accompanies mechanization, so that workers are part and parcel of the world of work of tomorrow?
Well, I think you put your finger on the core. I think the fact that some jobs are mechanized, and jobs which maybe it's for reasons of safety and other reasons we don't necessarily want workers to have to risk their lives doing. That could potentially be a good thing if we can harness those skills and try and ensure that there's a good, smooth transition to other activities, new service industries, IT industries, moving up the value chain in terms of sorts of exports which a country can produce. Now, jobs, skilling is not the only part of that strategy, but it's an important part. Workers don't leave their brains behind when they go to work in the morning. If companies really want to engage and empower workers and try and use technology more effectively and use the skills of the workers, that also requires empowerment. It requires a different sort of model, I would say, of capitalism for the future as well. So I think it's an ambitious agenda, but it can be done. It can change the world.
Final question, maybe you could just make sense of the fragmentation of the union movement that we're seeing again in the South African context. Fragmentation coupled with politicization once again. Does this bode well for workers in the future?
Well, look, I'm a long way in my day job from South Africa, so I've worked with very many years with Zeli Vavi and other colleagues in the South African trade union movement. I mean, we have a very strong lesson from South Africa at the end of apartheid and the role the union movement played in that, as in other parts of the world. In Tunisia now, the reason we have a relatively stable democracy in Tunisia with elections is also because of the union movement keeping the country together. My only message is that I think unity, a strong union movement which reflects the real industrial issues of its membership, but also has some independence from the political system and can actually represent those workers, is key. I'm not drawing lessons about South Africa on that issue, but it's crucially important for all of us in the world that South Africa and the South African labour movement is really successful in the future.